The wind off the Atlantic came in waves that night, cold, heavy, and full of salt. Halifax hadn't seen a storm like this in years. Rain hammered against the harbor glass towers, streetlights flickered, and the sound of the sea seemed to rise into every alley and rooftop. By the time the first transformer blew, most people were already indoors. Noah Grant wasn't one of them. He stood beside his service truck at the edge of Lower Water Street, coat soaked through, yellow safety vest glinting in the storm light. A call had come in 10 minutes earlier. Total power failure at the Reed Energy Tower, downtown's newest high-rise, and the pride of Nova Scotia's clean energy sector. Noah had been with the city electrical department for 12 years. He'd worked ice storms, flash floods, and the blackout of 2016. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind whistled like a warning. Inside the truck, his phone buzzed with another alert. Main grid fault. Elevator outage. Emergency access pending. He grabbed his tool belt and flashlight. By the time he reached the tower, the building was nearly dark, its lobby lit only by the green glow of exit signs and the quiver of candlelight from someone's phone. The marble floor was slick with rainwater, tracked in by security guards arguing near the reception desk. "I told you it's not our fault," one of them shouted. "The backup generator failed." "And I told you the maintenance contract is your department," replied another, voice sharp with panic. Noah pushed through the commotion, showing his ID. "City Electrical, where's your control room?" The guards looked him up and down, unsure whether to trust him. He didn't look like the men who usually walked these halls, too worn, too calm. "Basement," one finally said, "but it's flooded. Half the systems are offline." "I'll manage," Noah said. He turned for the service elevator, then stopped. A faint, rhythmic noise came from the shaft beside it. 3 slow clangs, like metal, striking metal. Then, faintly, a voice. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" The sound was weak, muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was trapped inside. "Elevator 12, a guard muttered. "Been stuck since the first surge. Maintenance is supposed to handle it once the storm settles." Noah frowned. "There's a person in there now." "Yeah, but we can't open that door without authorization," the manager cut in. "We need clearance from corporate before anyone—" "Authorization?" Noah barked, the word tasting bitter. "She's calling for help." He didn't wait for a reply. He dropped his bag beside the door, pulled a crowbar from his belt, and jammed it into the seam between the metal panels. The guard tried again. "Sir, you can't do that." The next sound drowned him out. A shriek of bending steel as Noah forced the panels apart. Inside the shaft, darkness pressed like water. His flashlight beam cut through it. Dust, cables, the gleam of a silver car stuck halfway between floors. The emergency light inside the cabin blinked red, dim and failing. "Mamhot," he called. "You okay in there?" A pause, then a hoarse voice. "I'm here. Please hurry." "Hang on," he said. "I'll get you out." He pried the doors wider, wedging the gap with his wrench. The elevator was trapped between the 11th and 12th floors. Floor panel angled just enough for him to slide in. Rain and sweat stung his eyes as he climbed into the shaft, boots finding grip on the cold metal ledge. "Don't panic," he said, voice steady. "I'm right outside." I can't see you," she whispered. "It's getting hard to breathe." He flicked his flashlight upward, catching a glimpse of her, curled in the corner, business suit soaked, hair loose from its pins. Her face was pale, eyes wide, but there was something strong in the way she held herself, even in fear. "Okay," Noah said, measuring the gap. "Elevators wedged, cables intact. I'll open this door enough for you to crawl through." She nodded, trembling. "Who are you?" "Maintenance tech," he replied, driving the crowbar into the top panel. "Name's Noah Grant." The first bolt gave way, then another. The door shifted, opening enough for him to reach inside. "All right, you're going to need to climb toward my voice, slowly." Her hands shook as she moved forward. The moment her fingers touched his glove, she exhaled, a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh. He pulled her up with a single motion, careful not to scrape her against the metal edge. When they finally tumbled onto the hallway floor, both were breathing hard. The emergency lights flickered. For a second, the world was all shadows and pulse. "Are you hurt?" Noah asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, eyes adjusting to the light. "Just dizzy." "Sit still." He slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him. Confusion and gratitude tangled across her face. "You came alone?" she asked. "Storm's got everyone tied up," he said. "I was closest." He stood, tested the building lights again. Nothing. Backup generators fried. "You should stay put till paramedics arrive." As he reached for his radio, she spoke again. "Wait, thank you. I didn't even know anyone heard me." He met her eyes. "Someone always hears," he said quietly. Outside, thunder cracked like a whip. The building shuddered. He crouched again, scanning her face for injuries. She looked around, suddenly aware of where they were, the sleek hallway of her own company tower. But Noah didn't know that. He just saw another person in trouble. The storm gave one last rumble. Then, for the first time that night, silence. "Power's stabilizing," his radio crackled. "Good work, Grant." He nodded absently, helping the woman to her feet. The glow from his flashlight caught her profile. Sharp, elegant, but softened now by exhaustion. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. "Yes, I just..." She hesitated, studying him. "You work for the city?" "Mostly," he said. "Sometimes contract jobs." "You didn't have to risk that," she murmured. "Didn't think about it," Noah replied, adjusting his tool belt. "Somebody was scared. That's enough reason." Her lips parted as if to speak again, but the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted. Two security officers rushed down the corridor, radios buzzing. "Ma'am," one exclaimed. "Ms. Reed, are you all right?" Noah froze. The name hit like static. The woman straightened slightly, gathering her composure. "I'm fine," she said. "Thanks to him." The guards turned to Noah, realizing who stood before them. The CEO of Reed Energy, the city's youngest corporate leader, heir to a billion-dollar legacy, and the man who'd just pried open an elevator with his bare hands. He nodded once, uncomfortable under their stare. "You're safe now," he said, stepping back. "Wait," Clara began, but he was already walking toward the stairwell. "Sir," one guard called, "we'll need your statement." Noah didn't turn around. "You've got her. That's what matters." Down 12 flights of stairs, the echo of rain returned. He stepped out into the night again, soaked and shivering, city lights flickering back to life one by one. The street smelled of wet asphalt and ozone. He paused beside his truck, looking up at the dark tower. Somewhere inside, that woman, Clara Reed, was surrounded by people again. He hoped she was breathing easier. When his radio buzzed, he lifted it to his mouth. "Elevator 12 secure," he reported. "Occupant safe." "Copy that," the dispatcher replied. "Good work, Grant. Head home." Noah slid into the driver's seat, peeling off his gloves. The storm outside was easing, but the rhythm of his heartbeat stayed quick. Through the windshield, the skyline glowed faintly, small islands of light in a dark city. He turned the key, the engine rumbling low. His reflection in the glass looked tired, streaked with rain. Still, there was a trace of something else in his eyes. Purpose, maybe, or just relief. When the radio crackled again, he muttered half to himself, half to the empty cab. "I just fix what's broken. That's all." The words lingered in the air as he drove into the night, headlights cutting through the last sheets of rain, the city slowly awakening behind him. And as you picture him disappearing down that Halifax street, a man unseen by most, yet holding the city together one circuit at a time, remember this. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage light up entire worlds. Stay with the story. Watch till the end. Because what comes next will remind you why even in darkness, there's always someone willing to bring the light back. Morning came late to Halifax. The storm had passed, leaving the streets glazed with rainwater and the harbor breathing steam into the pale sky. At the 12th floor of the Reed Energy Tower, the scent of ozone still lingered. Burnt wiring, damp carpet, the faint memory of fear. Clara Reed stood by the broken elevator doors, a coffee untouched in her hand. Maintenance crews moved around her, resetting circuits, pulling panels. Every few minutes, someone stopped to ask if she was all right, and she nodded, though her mind was elsewhere, still caught in that narrow box of metal and darkness. It wasn't the panic that haunted her. It was the moment the door gave way, when a rough hand reached through and the beam of a flashlight cut across her face. He hadn't asked who she was. He hadn't waited for instructions or permission. He'd just acted. In a building full of people who lived by protocol, that had felt like something holy. She turned to her assistant, a young woman clutching a tablet and looking more anxious than usual. Find out who was on site last night. I want the name of the technician who responded to the emergency call. The assistant blinked. You mean the city worker? I can pull the service logs. Do that, Clara said, and check the security footage, the one with the flashlight. The assistant hesitated. You want to thank him? Clara's voice softened. I want to understand him. Outside, the city was still half asleep. A few traffic lights blinked amber. Gulls circled over the pier, and puddles caught slivers of morning sun. Across town, in a small walk-up above a hardware store, Noah Grant was coaxing his ancient coffee maker into one more day of service. The kitchen smelled of toast and engine grease, a scent that had somehow become home. Zoe, he called, you'll miss the bus again. A pair of socked feet came sliding across the linoleum. Zoe, 10 years old and endlessly curious, carried her backpack in one hand and a half-assembled Lego turbine in the other. Her curls framed a face that could light up a power grid. Dad, she asked, climbing onto the chair, did you fix something important last night? He smiled faintly, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. Yeah, just a light that went out. Big one or small one? Big enough, he said. She grinned. Then you're basically a superhero. He laughed under his breath. Superheroes don't wear steel-toe boots, kid. Zoe bit into her toast, watching him. She had her mother's eyes, wide, thoughtful, always searching for meaning. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You look tired. Storm kept me busy. He ruffled her hair. Eat up, I'll walk you to the stop. As they stepped outside, the air carried that post-rain clarity, sharp and fresh. The North End still wore its history. Brick facades, weathered murals, old power lines crisscrossing the sky. Neighbors waved as they passed, and Noah waved back, the quiet rhythm of routine grounding him. By the time he returned to the apartment, sunlight had pushed through the clouds. He made a second cup of coffee, opened his worn tool bag to clean and dry his equipment, and froze. Inside, nestled between a wrench and a roll of electrical tape, sat a paper cup with the Reed Energy logo and a folded note tucked beneath the lid. The coffee inside was still warm. He turned the note over. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. For the man who brought light back. See. Noah stared at it for a long moment, the corners of his mouth twitching into something between confusion and a smile. It wasn't common for anyone to leave him notes, let alone one like this. He set the cup on the counter, read the words again. See? Whoever she was, she must have gone out of her way, but how had she found his locker? He sipped the coffee. Sweet. Not his usual kind. Still, it warmed him more than he expected. At the other end of the city, Clara was back in her office. The skyline stretched wide behind her desk, glass windows reflecting the washed-out blue of morning. Her assistant returned, hesitant. I pulled the report. The technician's name is Noah Grant. Works for Halifax City Electrical. 12 years on record, 0 complaints. Clara nodded slowly. Does he subcontract here often? Sometimes, yes. Routine maintenance. Does he know who I am? The assistant looked uncertain. Probably not. Good, Clara murmured. She dismissed the assistant with a wave, turning the note she'd written in her mind. For the man who brought light back. It sounded sentimental now, but last night, in the dark, she hadn't been thinking of sentiment. She'd been thinking of survival, of the sheer relief in hearing a voice that didn't belong to protocol or fear. For most of her career, she'd been surrounded by people who waited for permission to speak, to act, to think. Noah hadn't waited, and that simple defiance, that instinct to move, had left a mark she couldn't shake. That evening, the wind had calmed, and Halifax glimmered beneath a thin fog. Noah stood on the narrow balcony of his apartment, leaning on the rail. The city hummed again, cars passing, gulls crying somewhere near the harbor. Below, lights blinked in windows like steady heartbeats. He glanced back inside, where Zoe sat at the table with her Lego pieces spread out like a miniature skyline. She hummed quietly, lost in her own world. "Need help with that turbine?" he asked. "Nope," she said, not looking up. "I'm fixing it." He smiled. "Guess it runs in the family." When she finished, she turned the little propeller toward him. "Look, Dad, it spins when you breathe on it." He leaned down, blew gently. The blades turned, catching the kitchen light. For a moment, everything felt still. Storm gone, apartment warm, daughter safe. Then he noticed the paper cup on the counter again, its logo faint in the dim light. He thought about the woman in the elevator, her voice trembling but proud, her eyes adjusting to the dark. He hadn't known her name then, but now he did. Clara Reed. It should have ended there. He'd done his job, she'd gone her way. But something about the whole thing lingered. A sense that maybe the world didn't have to stay divided between those who gave orders and those who carried them out. He poured the rest of the coffee into the sink, but kept the note, slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, the same one he wore on every night shift. When Zoe asked for a bedtime story, he sat beside her, reading softly until her breathing slowed. As he turned off the lamp, he caught sight of the city through the window, the same tower rising against the night, its lights back on, shining steady again. He whispered to no one in particular, "Guess you fixed more than wires this time." Outside, the harbor wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and rain back inland. In an office high above, Clara stood by her window too, watching the same city glow. Two people, two windows, the same thought, that sometimes a single act done without permission could ripple farther than anyone expected. And neither of them knew that this quiet connection, the man who fixed what was broken, and the woman who learned to see what truly mattered, was only beginning. The next afternoon carried the smell of thawing earth and diesel, Halifax in late March, the city shaking off winter, one puddle at a time. The old municipal power station sat near the harbor, its red brick walls streaked with salt and time. Inside, the hum of machinery mixed with the hiss of steam. Noah Grant was tightening a junction box when a voice echoed behind him, too crisp for the usual crew. "Mr. Grant?" He straightened slowly, wiping grease from his hands. Standing in the doorway was Clara Reed, not the frightened woman from the elevator, but the composed CEO he'd seen on billboards. Her tailored coat looked out of place against the rust and concrete. "You found me," Noah said, unsure whether to laugh or frown. Clara smiled, a little sheepishly. "It wasn't hard. Your name was in the incident report." He nodded, still guarded. "And you came all the way down here. Why?" She held up 2 paper cups. "To say thank you. Properly this time." Noah hesitated. The crew nearby had gone silent, watching from a distance. He could almost hear the gossip forming. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "You pulled me out of an elevator, Mr. Grant. A cup of coffee isn't much repayment." He looked at the cups, one marked black, the other with a swirl of cream. "You even guessed right," he said quietly. Clara's smile deepened, habit of paying attention. He set his wrench aside, took the cup from her, and nodded once. "Thank you." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the turbines filled the silence. "I should get back to work," Noah said, glancing toward the control room. "Of course," she replied quickly, sensing his distance. "I didn't mean to interrupt." As she turned to leave, he added, "You're not like most people who come down here." She stopped. Because I'm wearing heels? Because you came yourself. Their eyes met, brief, steady, before she offered a quiet, maybe I just needed to see what keeps the lights on. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading against the wet floor. 3 days later, fate, or perhaps something gentler, crossed their paths again. Noah and Zoe were at the North End Community Center, setting up a table for the children's science fair. Zoe's display was a small wind turbine connected to a light bulb. She'd painted a sign in bright marker, "Clean power for our town." While Noah adjusted the stand, Zoe bounced on her toes. "Do you think people will like it?" "Of course, Stint," he said. "It lights up. Everyone likes light." Across the room, volunteers bustled, parents carried boxes of cupcakes, and the air smelled of glue and excitement. That's when a familiar voice spoke behind them. "This looks impressive," Noah turned. Clara stood there in a navy coat, holding a small cardboard box. Her expression was polite, almost cautious, like someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. "Ms. Reed," Noah said slowly, "didn't expect to see you here." "I saw the poster for the event," she said. "It's near my office. I thought I'd stop by." Zoe's eyes widened. "You're the Ms. Reed? From the building with the spinning wind thing on top?" Clara laughed. "Guilty as charged. And you must be Zoe?" "Dad talks about you," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "Does he?" Clara shot Noah a teasing glance. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just mention the elevator," he muttered. "Well," Clara said, placing the box on the table, "I brought something for your project." Zoe opened it carefully. Inside lay a small, solar-powered lamp, its glass catching the overhead light. "It stores energy during the day," Clara explained. "At night it shines for hours. Thought it might fit your theme." Zoe's face lit up brighter than the lamp itself. "This is amazing. Thank you," Noah exhaled, half smiling. "You didn't have to." "I know," Clara interrupted gently, "but sometimes it's nice to do things without being asked." For the next hour she stayed, not as the CEO on magazine covers, but as a curious visitor. She crouched beside Zoe's table, helping tape wires and cheering when the turbine spun fast enough to light the bulb. The laughter between them was easy, unforced. When the judging began, Noah watched the two from across the room. It had been a long time since he'd seen Zoe so animated with an adult who wasn't family. Clara asked questions that made the girl think, not just answer. After the fair, Zoe earned a ribbon for Best Practical Design. She clutched it proudly while Clara applauded. "You've got an engineer in the making," Clara said to Noah as they packed up. "She's got her mother's patience," he replied quietly. Clara nodded, the smile softening. "She's lucky to have you." He looked at her, surprised by the sincerity. "We're lucky to have each other." Outside, dusk settled over the city, and the first stars winked through the haze. The three of them stepped out together. The community center's lights reflected off puddles like small constellations. Zoe skipped ahead, spinning her ribbon in the air. "Dad, can we stop for ice cream?" "In this weather?" Noah laughed. "You'll freeze." "I'll wear my hat," she argued. Clara chuckled. "I'll buy her one scoop, just for science." He raised an eyebrow. "You bribing my kid now?" "Consider it field research," she said. So they walked to the corner cafe, a modest spot with steamed windows and the smell of roasted beans spilling into the street. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. At a small table by the window, Clara and Noah sat with their coffee, while Zoe devoured a cup of chocolate swirl. "You still don't like sugar in your coffee," Clara noticed. Noah shrugged. "Keeps me awake." "Same reason you fix things, I suppose. Keeps you focused." He smiled faintly. "And you? Still running the world from the top floor?" She looked out at the fog rolling in from the harbor. "Trying to. But lately I've been wondering if I'm missing what's happening on the ground floor." Their conversation drifted, about storms, about growing up by the ocean, about how Halifax always smelled like metal and salt. There was no flirtation, no tension, just an understanding that felt oddly familiar. When it was time to go, Zoe waved her goodbye, clutching the solar lamp like a treasure. "Thank you for coming," Noah said at the door. Clara zipped her coat, smiled, You gave me light once. Tonight, I just returned a little of it. He watched her step into the evening fog, her silhouette fading beneath the street lamps. Back home as Zoe slept, Noah placed the solar lamp on their windowsill. Its soft golden glow filled the room, gentle and steady. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a stop between work shifts. It felt alive. And somewhere across the harbor, Clara sat by her own window, the same faint light glimmering on her desk. Two worlds, one of steel and one of light, had brushed against each other. Neither yet understood how deeply they'd begun to change. The wind along the harbor carried the smell of salt and diesel, the sound of gulls rising and falling like the tide itself. Spring had come to Halifax slowly, reluctant to let go of winter's chill, but the light lingered a little, longer now, thin and silver, stretching across the cranes and freighters that framed the docks. Noah was out near Pier 6, hands deep in a mess of cables, when a familiar voice drifted from behind him. "Mr. Grant, do you ever take a day off?" He straightened, squinting against the afternoon glare. Clara stood a few feet away, wearing a navy jacket instead of her usual blazer. Her hair was loose today, the wind teasing strands across her face. "Someone's got to keep the lights on," Noah said. "Funny," she replied. "I thought that was my department." He smiled, shaking his head. "Your department writes the checks. Mine makes sure people can still see what they're paying for." Her laughter came soft, genuine. "Touché." She stepped closer, careful not to trip on the scattered tools. "I brought coffee. Peace offering." He took it, surprised. "You keep doing that." "I like continuity," she said, "and gratitude." They stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at their sleeves, gulls crying overhead. Around them, the harbor crews were repairing a downed power line, sparks briefly flaring against the pale sky. Clara watched the team work with quiet fascination. "Do you ever get used to that sound?" she asked. "The crackle?" She nodded. "Never," he said, "but you learn to respect it. Power's like that. It listens only to people who treat it right." Something in his tone lingered, and for the first time, Clara saw what leadership could look like without titles or glass walls. Hands steady, voice calm, doing what needed to be done simply because it mattered. That evening, when the sight lights dimmed and the crews packed up, Noah pointed toward a small hill beyond the docks. "You and Zoe should come by this weekend. She's been working on something at home, says it's top secret." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Top secret?" "She built a mini windmill out of spare parts, wants to show it off." "I'd like that," she said. Saturday arrived, clear and bright, a rare gift in early April. The Grant apartment smelled of pancakes and warm maple syrup when Clara knocked. Zoe answered the door wearing safety goggles 3 sizes too big. "Come in! You're just in time for the big reveal." In the living room, a makeshift wind turbine stood near the window. Old fan blades, a bicycle chain, bits of wire, and a repurposed phone charger. "Impressive," Clara said, crouching beside it. Zoe grinned. "If the wind's strong enough, it can charge Dad's phone." Noah scratched his neck, embarrassed. "She raided my toolbox." Clara looked between them, her smile soft. "Innovation runs in the family." They opened the window, letting the afternoon breeze sweep through. The blades began to turn, creaking at first, then whirling faster until a faint green light blinked on at the base. Zoe clapped. "It works." "Barely," Noah joked, but pride flickered in his eyes. Clara watched the two of them, father and daughter, framed by sunlight, laughter, and the faint hum of something they'd built together. It was simple, imperfect, and real. "You don't wait for permission to do the right thing, do you?" she said quietly. Noah looked at her. "Never learned how." On Monday, that line replayed in Clara's head as she sat in the glass conference room at Reed Energy. The quarterly report flashed on the screen. Profit margins up, operating costs down. The CFO was smiling, the board members nodding, yet all she could hear was the echo of Noah's words. "You don't wait for permission." "Next quarter," the CFO was saying, "we'll finalize the automation cuts in the maintenance division, The projections are strong. Less labor, more margin. Clara frowned. How many employees are we talking about? Roughly 40 across regional sites. But the savings, 40 families, she interrupted. A silence fell. One board member cleared his throat. Clara, with respect, we're in an energy transition. Blue-collar roles are becoming redundant. The market's moving on. She stared out the window at the cranes by the harbor, remembering the workers welding under the wind, the sound of their laughter cutting through static. Maybe the market's moving too fast, she said finally. We talk about sustainable energy, but maybe we should start talking about sustainable people. The room stayed silent. Someone typed something into a tablet, probably marking her as emotional or off message, but she didn't care. That night, she drove without direction until she reached Point Pleasant Park. The sea was restless, waves catching the moonlight in broken silver threads. She got out, walking the gravel path until she spotted Noah and Zoe sitting near the edge of the lookout, a thermos between them. You two always find the best spots, she said. Zoe waved her over. We're watching the lighthouse. It blinks every 5 seconds. Clara sat beside them, pulling her coat tighter. The air smelled of pine and salt. I think I needed this, she admitted. Long day? Noah asked. She nodded. Sometimes I look at spreadsheets full of numbers and wonder where the people went. He smiled faintly. Numbers don't tell stories. People do. For a while they said nothing. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, cutting through the dark, bright, brief, and constant. Zoe rested her head on her father's shoulder, eyelids heavy. Noah covered her with his jacket. She always falls asleep near the water, he said. I can see why, Clara murmured. It's the only place that sounds like breathing. A gull cried overhead, the wind picking up again. You said something once, she began. About doing the right thing without waiting. How do you know what that is? The right thing, I mean. Noah took a long breath, watching the horizon. You don't always know. You just listen. To the people who can't shout as loud as the rest. His words landed like an anchor, steady, grounded. Clara turned her gaze toward the lighthouse again, its beam sweeping across her face. Catching the glint of unshed tears, she didn't bother to hide. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For reminding me why I started all this in the first place. He said nothing, only passed her the thermos. The coffee inside was still warm. They sat together, 3 silhouettes framed against the Atlantic. The girl asleep, the man steady, the woman somewhere between light and shadow. When the beam passed over them again, it cast their faces in a soft, blue glow. And for a fleeting second, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not power, not control, but peace. It was the kind of peace that comes when you finally understand. Light isn't about brightness. It's about direction. The first cracks appeared, quietly, like frost along a window pane, invisible until the light hit it, just right. 2 weeks after that night at Point Pleasant Park, Clara Reed sat in her office overlooking the harbor. The morning sun stretched across the glass, turning the waves below into ribbons of gold. She should have felt calm. The company's numbers were strong, the new apprenticeship proposal gaining traction. Yet something in the air felt brittle, off balance. Her assistant entered, pale-faced, clutching a tablet. You might want to see this. Clara took it, scanning the headlines splashed across the morning feed. Reed Energy CEO seen at Harbor Park with city worker. Sources suggest unprofessional conduct. Beneath it, a blurry photo. Her, Noah, and Zoe sitting on the rocks, the lighthouse glowing faintly in the distance. A moment of quiet peace turned into fuel for gossip. Clara set the tablet down, voice even. Who leaked this? We don't know, but the board's already calling an emergency meeting. She closed her eyes. It didn't take much imagination to know where it came from. Across town, in a gray office near the power station, Colin Ward, the company's vice president of operations, watched the same article with a satisfied smirk. He had been waiting for something like this. A misstep, a headline, anything to make Clara look vulnerable. She's too idealistic, he told one of his aides. This is business, not a charity project. The aide hesitated. You think this will stick? Oh, it'll stick, Colin said. Optics matter. Let the board decide how clean they want their brand to look. He didn't need to push too hard. The media would do the rest. By afternoon, Clara's phone was buzzing nonstop. Journalists camped outside Reed Tower, their microphones like spears of curiosity. Ms. Reed, can you confirm the nature of your relationship with Mr. Grant? Was this city employee involved in your clean energy initiative for personal reasons? Did company resources support your personal relationship? She stepped past them without answering, the clicking of cameras following like rain. Inside, the boardroom lights burned cold. Colin was already there, flanked by 2 shareholders. Clara, he began smoothly, we're concerned. The press is using words like scandal and conflict of interest. We need clarity. There is no scandal, Clara said. Mr. Grant saved my life during the blackout. He's an electrician, not a political tool. The story being spun is false. Colin leaned back, expression neutral. Even so, perception shapes truth in our world. Perhaps it would be best for him to take a leave. Temporary, of course, while we conduct an internal review. Clara's pulse tightened. You mean suspend him? It's protocol. She looked around the table. Eyes avoided hers. Protocol was just another word for cowardice. At the power station, Noah received the news in the form of a folded memo handed to him by his supervisor. Pending investigation for safety breach during prior emergency response. No explanation, no conversation, just cold words on cheap paper. He read it twice, his jaw tightening. Around him, the others pretended to keep working, though he could feel their eyes. What's this about? He asked quietly. The supervisor sighed. It's from the top, Noah. Something to do with that article going around. Just, lay low for a while, okay? Lay low, Noah repeated, as if the phrase itself had weight. I fix things, remember? Laying low doesn't suit me. He gathered his tools, each click of metal against metal sharper than the last. When he reached his locker, he paused. The photo of Zoe taped inside, her gap-toothed grin, her science fair ribbon still bright, seemed to stare back at him, asking the question he didn't yet have the heart to answer. That evening, the TV news looped the same footage. Clara walking briskly past reporters, her face calm, but her shoulders tight. The anchor's voice droned. Reed Energy's CEO faces scrutiny over alleged personal ties with a city employee involved in maintenance contracts. Critics question her judgment and leadership integrity. Noah muted the sound, the flicker of the screen reflecting on his worn kitchen table. Across from him, Zoe stirred her macaroni and cheese without eating. Dad, she asked quietly, are we in trouble again? He looked up, his throat tight. No, sweetheart. Then why did they say bad things about Miss Reed? She's nice? He hesitated, setting down his fork. Sometimes people don't understand what's good for them. They get scared when things change. Zoe frowned. But you didn't do anything wrong, he forced a smile. That's not always what matters. She leaned closer, resting her chin on her hands. Are you going back to work? He looked at the empty space on the counter where his tool belt usually hung. Not for a bit. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of rain starting up outside. Zoe broke it with a whisper. I can help fix stuff until you go back. He reached out, brushing her hair from her eyes. Maybe you already are. Meanwhile, in her office, Clara stared at the city lights bleeding into the fog. Her reflection in the window looked older somehow, not from time, but from the weight of disappointment. She picked up her phone, scrolled through contacts, and stopped at Noah's name. For a moment, her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she set it down. Outside, lightning flickered faintly over the harbor, the kind that promised a storm, but never delivered. The world, she thought, was full of systems pretending to be strong until someone dared to care. And the moment you did, the cracks showed. But cracks, she reminded herself, were also how light got in. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. Not the kind that came from clouds, but from headlines. For 10 days, Clara Reed had been silent. No interviews, no statements, no explanations. The company's PR team had begged her to let it pass, to wait for the next news cycle. But Clara knew silence wasn't strength, it was surrender. So, when the sun rose over the Halifax harbor that morning, the glass lobby of Reed Energy filled with reporters, cameras, and an uneasy hum of curiosity. Clara stood behind the podium, the company's crest behind her, a wall of light filtering through the tall windows. No assistants, no legal team, just her. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady, though her hands were cold. "For those who have asked where I've been these past few days, I've been listening. To my board, to my employees, and to the people who work far from these glass walls, but make our light possible." Cameras clicked. A few reporters exchanged glances. "I want to begin with the story that brought us here," she continued. 2 months ago, during a citywide blackout, I was trapped in an elevator. A man named Noah Grant, a technician from the Halifax Electrical Department, ignored orders to wait for clearance and risked his safety to get me out. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't ask who I was. He heard someone call for help, and he acted. She paused, letting the words settle. He didn't break rules. He saved a life. A murmur spread across the room, some skeptical, some moved. "I met Noah again later," Clara said. "Not because of a scandal, but because I wanted to understand the kind of courage that acts before it's convenient. He reminded me why I entered this field in the first place, to create power that serves people, not the other way around." Her voice gained strength, confidence threading through conviction. "That's why, today, I'm announcing the launch of the Reed Foundation for Clean Jobs, a program dedicated to training and employing local workers in renewable energy. This isn't charity, it's investment into dignity, opportunity, and the future of our communities." Behind her, a large screen flickered to life. The lights dimmed slightly as a short film began to play. It opened with the image of a storm-darkened Halifax skyline. Then, the frame shifted to Noah's hands, weathered and steady, working through cables under a flickering light. No narration, just the sound of wind, rain, and the quiet rhythm of someone who fixed what others forgot. And then came Zoe, smiling, holding up her small wind turbine, the blades spinning in the sunlight. Her voice, soft but clear. "My dad says when you fix something, you have to believe it's worth saving." The camera cut to Noah, standing by the harbor. He said nothing, just looked at the horizon, the kind of gaze that didn't demand attention but earned it. The film ended with a single line across the screen. "Power belongs to everyone." When the lights came back, the room was silent. Clara looked out over the crowd. "This program begins here in Halifax," she said. "We'll partner with trade schools, local unions, and city departments. We'll provide scholarships for single parents, veterans, and anyone who's been told their work no longer matters." A reporter in the front raised her hand. "Ms. Reed, are you admitting to a personal relationship with Mr. Grant?" Clara met her eyes, unflinching. "I'm acknowledging a professional respect that grew into something more human. I won't apologize for that. If caring about the people who build our world disqualifies me from leading it, then maybe it's time we redefine leadership." Another reporter spoke up, his tone softer. "Some say this is damage control. Is it?" Clara smiled faintly. "If honesty counts as damage control, then perhaps the system is the one that's broken." The room rippled with murmurs, and cameras flashing again. But the energy had changed. The story wasn't one of scandal anymore. It was of defiance, of transparency, of a woman standing still, while the world around her tried to decide who she was allowed to be. Across town, in the modest apartment that smelled faintly of coffee and rain, Noah watched the press conference from a small television on the counter. Zoe sat beside him, her legs swinging off the stool, eyes glued to the screen. "There you are," she said, pointing as the short film replayed. "Look, Dad, that's your jacket. And that's my windmill." Noah smiled quietly, but his throat felt tight. "Yeah, looks like she kept her promise." "Are you mad she showed your face?" He shook his head. "No, sweetheart. She showed what mattered. Zoe grinned. So, are you famous now? He chuckled. Fame doesn't fix things. When the conference ended, he turned off the TV. For a while, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Then the phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Thank you for reminding me what light really means. See. He didn't reply. He just stared at the words until the letters blurred. By evening, the story had shifted online. Hashtags like truth, over optics, and Reed Foundation were trending. Columnists praised the courage of a CEO who chose integrity over image. A headline on the Halifax Daily read, From scandal to substance, Reed Energy's CEO turns controversy into community vision. Even the boardroom tone had changed. Colin Ward's smug certainty had evaporated under public admiration. He watched the live coverage from his office, jaw tight, as the anchor praised Clara's leadership. She turned a story about optics into a story about purpose, the anchor said. Colin muted the TV, the reflection of his own frown in the dark screen. For now, he muttered. Later that night, Clara returned home to her apartment by the waterfront. The storm outside had given way to a soft drizzle. She slipped off her heels, leaving them by the door, and poured herself a glass of water. On her desk, the first donation receipts for the Reed Foundation had already begun to arrive. Small business owners, teachers, former employees who'd been laid off years ago, all sending words of support. She sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer through the mist. Somewhere out there, she imagined Noah and Zoe doing the same, watching the same skyline, breathing the same rain-scented air. Her phone buzzed again. You made them listen. She smiled, typing back, We did. Then she turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from her desk lamp. The faint hum of the harbor drifted through the open window, mingling with her steady breath. The noise, the scrutiny, the speculation. It all faded into something quieter, something true. For the first time in weeks, she felt free, not because the storm had passed, but because she had chosen to stand in it. Outside, the rain softened into mist, and across the harbor the city lights reflected off the water like hundreds of small, flickering stars. And for a woman who had spent her life building power, Clara Reed finally understood what it meant to share it. The return was quieter than anyone expected. No grand announcement, no ceremony, just Noah walking back into the power station on a crisp Monday morning, the smell of coffee and machine oil greeting him like an old friend. A few coworkers nodded. Some offered tight smiles. The air was awkward at first, but it didn't take long for things to fall back into rhythm. He picked up his wrench, wiped down his old workbench, and took a slow breath. The hum of the generators filled the room, steady and familiar. For the first time in weeks, he felt grounded again. By noon, his supervisor approached, clipboard in hand. Good to have you back, Grant. They're assembling the team for the new Community Energy Center in Dartmouth. The Foundation's overseeing it directly, Ms. Reed included. Noah hesitated. You mean she's the supervisor smirked. In charge? As always, and Noah nodded, a mix of anticipation and unease curling in his chest. Then I guess I'd better not be late. The Dartmouth Community Energy Center wasn't much yet, just an empty warehouse smelling of sawdust and possibility. But to Clara, it already looked like the future. Solar panels stacked by the wall, crates labeled wind module, prototype A, blueprints taped across every surface. When Noah arrived, she was there, crouched over a circuit board, sleeves rolled up, her hair escaping its usual neatness. She looked more human that way, less untouchable, more alive. You're early, she said, without looking up. Technically, I'm late, he replied. A few weeks. She glanced up, smiling faintly. Welcome back, then. They fell into rhythm, as if no storm had ever passed between them. Noah checked the wiring for the turbines. Clara reviewed schematics, and Zoe, tagging along after school, buzzed between them, notebook in hand, scribbling diagrams of her own. Every evening, the three of them stayed a little later than planned. The space slowly came alive. The hum of tools, the smell of solder and new paint, the low murmur of conversation blending into the sound of the harbor just outside. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. And for Clara, that honesty felt like redemption. One evening, Zoe insisted on a test run. The sun was setting, flooding the warehouse with a faint amber glow. The turbines were wired but not yet activated, cables coiled neatly like sleeping snakes. "Let me do it," Zoe said, hands on the main switch. Noah raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Clara crouched beside the girl, guiding her hand. "Engineering is about courage and care. Ready?" Zoe grinned. "Ready." She flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the blades began to spin. One by one, the overhead lights flickered to life until the whole warehouse glowed golden. Zoe gasped. "It works!" Noah laughed, pure and unrestrained. "It actually works?" Clara turned to him, her face lit by the soft glow of the turbines. "You sound surprised." "I'm always surprised when something beautiful comes out of chaos," he said. For a moment, the world stilled, the whir of the blades above them, the reflection of light dancing on the metal floor, Zoe spinning in circles beneath it all, her laughter echoing against the walls. Then, the music started. Not planned. Just Zoe pulling out her phone, a playlist she'd been working on. The song was soft, rhythmic, the kind that invited you to breathe slower. Clara laughed. "Oh no." "Oh yes," Zoe declared. "You two have to dance. It's a rule." "Whose rule, Ain?" Noah asked. "Mine," Zoe said, hands on her hips. Clara gave in first. "One dance," she said, looking at Noah. He hesitated only a second before stepping closer. The air between them felt charged, warmer than the lights overhead. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first. Clara's hand rested against his chest, his on her back. The song filled the space around them, simple and true. Outside, the harbor breeze slipped through the open door, carrying the scent of salt and spring. "Did you ever think it would come to this?" Clara asked softly. "What? Fixing lights with the CEO of an energy company?" She smiled. "No. Dancing in one?" He chuckled, low and warm. "Life's full of strange repairs." When the song ended, they stood still, unwilling to break the quiet. The turbines spun above them, steady and constant, a heartbeat made of metal and light. Zoe clapped from the sidelines. "You're not terrible," she said proudly. Clara laughed. "High praise." Noah looked at the girl, then at Clara, and something unspoken passed between them, a sense of belonging that didn't need names or promises. Weeks rolled into months, and the Dartmouth Center took shape. Classrooms for training apprentices, rooftop panels glinting in the sun, turbines catching the wind like sails. Noah mentored new recruits, young men and women who reminded him of himself years ago, hungry to prove they could build something that mattered. Clara worked beside him, sleeves rolled, learning to listen more than she spoke. Sometimes, when the day ended and the last worker left, they lingered, walking the quiet halls lit by clean power, the hum of turbines blending with the sound of laughter still hanging in the air. "You've built more than a project here," Noah said one evening, gazing up at the spinning blades. "So have you," Clara replied. "You taught us what power really means." He turned to her. "Power doesn't mean control. It means connection." She nodded slowly, the words settling between them. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the water, and for once, Halifax didn't feel divided between rich and poor, leaders and workers. It felt whole. And beneath the whir of those new turbines, two people who had once stood on opposite sides of that divide simply stood together, watching the light they had built flicker alive, steady, humble and full of promise. The storm didn't start with thunder. It began with an email. At 6:47 a.m., on a gray Tuesday morning, the members of the Reed Energy Board of Directors received an urgent notice of session from Vice President Colin Ward. The subject line was simple but sharp. Agenda, discussion of leadership conduct, and company integrity. By the time Clara arrived at headquarters, the marble lobby buzzed with whispers. Assistants avoided her eyes. The weight of expectation pressed in like a cold front. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. The long mahogany table gleamed like a stage, and on it lay folders, printouts, and carefully crafted resentment. Colin stood at the far end, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, ready for war. "Good morning, Ms. Reed," he greeted, voice lined with false civility. "We appreciate you joining us on such short notice." Clara set her folder down. "I wasn't aware I had a choice." He smiled thinly. "None of us do, when accountability is at stake," the other directors murmured. The meeting began. Colin wasted no time. He projected a slide onto the screen, a collage of headlines, screenshots, and photographs. Clara and Noah at the Dartmouth site, news clips from the previous scandal, and a new one, a leaked photo from the community gala, where she and Noah had danced beneath the turbine lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I believe we need to discuss whether Ms. Reed's continued leadership reflects the standards of this company." He let the images linger. "We've been under scrutiny before, but this crosses the line. Public intimacy with an employee, a subordinate, compromises our reputation. Our investors are nervous, our partners hesitant. It's not about her intentions, it's about optics." He turned to her. "Perception defines trust, Clara, and trust defines value." Clara looked at the screen, at her own life reduced to pixels and speculation. Then she met his gaze. "Optics," she repeated, softly, almost tasting the word. "You mean pretending?" Colin straightened. "I mean leadership." She rose, slowly from her chair. The air shifted. Even the faint hum of the lights seemed to pause. "If leadership means hiding the people who remind us why we lead," she said evenly, "then I'd rather lose the title." A few gasps rippled through the room. She continued, her voice calm but resolute. "You talk about reputation as if it's made of glass, but it's made of people, the ones who build, repair, and keep this company running when no one's watching. You want to talk about trust? I've seen it. It looks like a man working through a storm so someone else can make it home safe." Colin's jaw clenched. "This isn't about sentiment." "No," Clara said. "It's about courage, and the cost of pretending we're above the people who make our success possible." The room grew still. One of the younger board members, a man barely out of his 30s, spoke up timidly. "Ms. Reed, no one questions your passion, but the company's reputation will follow results," she interrupted, "and results come from people who believe in what they're building. The Reed Foundation isn't a distraction, it's our legacy. If this company wants to survive the next decade, it needs more than profit margins. It needs purpose." A silence fell that wasn't hostile this time. It was heavy, contemplative. At the far end of the table, an older woman, Helen Avery, the longest-serving member of the board, leaned forward. Her voice was soft, but carried authority born from decades of surviving rooms just like this one. "When I was young," Helen began, "I worked for a company that said the same things you're saying, Colin. They chased image, ignored people, and eventually, they collapsed under the weight of their own reflection." She turned to Clara. "Integrity is worth more than optics, always has been." Then she looked around the table. "And I think we all know which side of history we'd rather be on." The vote was called. 11 members, 5 for removal, 6 against. When the last hand was raised, the room exhaled, not with cheers, but with quiet relief. Colin stood frozen for a moment, disbelief shadowing his face. He collected his notes, his confidence fractured, then left the room without a word. The door shut behind him with the dull, final sound of defeat. Clara remained standing, though her knees trembled slightly. Helen rose and placed a hand on her arm. "You did the right thing," the older woman said. "Now make sure it matters." That evening, the sun set over the Halifax harbor, painting the sky in strokes of gold and violet. At the Dartmouth Energy Center, the turbines turned lazily in the sea breeze, catching the last light of day. Clara arrived unannounced. Noah was there, tightening bolts along the maintenance rail, his coveralls streaked with grease. "You missed quite a show today," she said, leaning against the railing. He looked up. "Boardroom storm?" "More like a hurricane," she said. Then, after a pause, "We made it through." He studied her face, the exhaustion, the quiet pride. "You win?" She shook her head gently. "No, we stayed." He nodded, understanding without needing more words. Zoe's laughter drifted from across the field, where she and a group of apprentices were running final checks on a small wind array. The turbines spun faster, each blade glowing faintly as dusk deepened. Clara watched, the corners of her mouth lifting. "You know," she said softly, "they called it inappropriate. What we have." Noah chuckled under his breath. "Funny, feels like the most appropriate thing in my life." The wind picked up, cool and clean. Above them, one of the larger turbines flickered to life, casting a slow-moving halo of light that danced across the gravel. Clara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for standing still while I fought the storm." He smiled. "We don't fight storms, Clara. We build through them." And as the turbine lights spun around them, soft and steady, it illuminated not scandal or rebellion, but something far rarer, resilience. Two figures, side by side, framed against the hum of power that now belonged to everyone. They didn't need titles, or optics, or permission, just purpose and the courage to live it. The sky over Halifax that morning was the kind that carried promise, clear, but still holding a hint of ocean mist. Flags fluttered along the newly built pier, and a modest crowd had already gathered beneath the banner that read, "Harbor Light Initiative, Power for the People." The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, the kind that sits between pride and disbelief. Workers in orange vests stood beside students in clean shirts. Local leaders mingled with families, and a few news cameras hovered near the front. For Clara, standing near the edge of the small stage, it felt surreal. The center behind her, the one that had once been nothing more than sketches and hope, was real now. Rows of wind turbines lined the dock. Solar panels, glinting like glass petals. The hum of energy already pulsed faintly beneath their feet. Noah was nearby, helping a group of kids from a local trade school set up a display on how the turbines converted wind into light. He looked at ease in a way Clara had never seen before. Shoulders relaxed, laughter easy, a quiet pride radiating from him that didn't need to be spoken. And Zoe, her bright yellow jacket standing out against the crowd, was running around with a clipboard, checking off last-minute details as if she were the event manager herself. When Clara caught Noah's gaze across the space, he gave her a small nod. It said everything. We did it. Together. The ceremony began with short introductions. City officials, sponsors, teachers. But the crowd's focus stayed on Noah, who stood quietly off to the side, hat in hand, waiting for his turn. Finally, Clara stepped to the microphone, her voice steady, though her heart thudded. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "When we first dreamed of this project, we weren't sure it could happen. It started with a blackout, a moment when our city went dark. But from that darkness came something far more powerful than electricity. Courage and connection." She paused, glancing toward Noah. "This center is proof that progress doesn't just come from technology. It comes from people who care enough to build it." Applause rose, warm and genuine. "And now," she continued, "I'd like to invite someone who knows more about fixing what's broken than any of us, Mr. Noah Grant." The crowd turned as Noah stepped forward. He adjusted the microphone awkwardly. Public speaking was never his comfort zone, but when he started, his voice carried the simple weight of truth. "I'm not used to talking in rooms like this," he began, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Most of the time I'm fixing things that nobody sees. Wires, switches, circuits, that people only notice when they stop working." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. I don't have fancy words, but I've learned something over the years. He looked out at the faces before him. Workers, families, Clara watching with quiet pride. We can't fix the whole world, but we can start with the lights that went out near us. Silence, then thunderous applause. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. Clara felt something swell in her chest. So pure, so proud, it hurt. Noah stepped down, cheeks flushed, and Zoe ran to hug him, before darting toward the main switch beside the stage. "Can I do it, Mom?" she called, to Clara, forgetting herself. Then corrected, "Ms. Reed?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara wiped at her eyes, nodding. "Go ahead, sweetheart. You started this more than you know." Zoe stood on tiptoe, hands trembling slightly, as she flipped the ceremonial lever. For a second, nothing. Then, one by one, the lights across the pier flickered to life. The wind turbines glowed from within, rings of soft amber light circling their bases like halos. The water mirrored it all, turning the harbor into a shimmering field of gold. The crowd gasped, then erupted into applause. Some cheered, some cried. Clara covered her mouth, tears slipping free. It wasn't just pride, it was release. Months of fighting, doubting, and standing her ground had led here to this glow spreading across the city like dawn. Beside her, Noah stood still, eyes reflecting the lights. When she turned to him, he simply said, "You see that? That's what faith looks like." She laughed through her tears. "Noah Grant, you're getting poetic," he smiled. "Blame the electricity." As the speeches ended and people began mingling, music drifted from a small local band. The sun sank lower, painting the water in copper tones. Clara stood near the first lamppost, a tall, curved structure crowned with a turban that hummed gently. She traced a hand along its smooth metal base, feeling the vibration of the energy running through it. When she looked up, Noah was there, walking toward her through the thinning crowd. He'd changed into a clean shirt, but the grease stains on his hands remained. Proof of the work he refused to hide. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. "Yeah," he murmured, "but I was looking at something else." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Simple, brushed metal, nothing fancy. Her breath caught. "Noah!" He opened it to reveal a ring, not gold or silver, but made from recycled copper wire, polished until it gleamed warm under the lights. Inside, engraved in neat script, were 3 words: "Fix what matters." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You taught me that power isn't about control. It's about care, about fixing what matters most. For me, that's you." The world around them dimmed into background blur, just the hum of the turbines, the distant chatter of guests, Zoe laughing somewhere near the stage. Clara's voice trembled. "You're proposing in front of the entire harbor?" He chuckled. "Figured it's the only place with good lighting." She laughed, tears glinting again. "You're impossible." "And you're stuck with me," he said softly. "So what do you say, Clara Reed?" For a long second, she didn't speak. She looked at the ring, then at the man who'd saved her life, challenged her, stood beside her in every storm. Then she nodded, slowly, surely, beautifully. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The crowd nearby caught on, and someone began clapping. Then everyone joined in. Zoe came running, eyes wide. "Did he?" Clara bent down, laughing through tears. "He did." Zoe squealed, and threw her arms around both of them. The 3 stood there, wrapped in a glow of applause, laughter, and light. Above them, the turbines spun, catching the last wind of the evening. And as night fell over Halifax, the Harbor Light Initiative came fully alive. Each bulb, each circuit, each spark a testament to something more than engineering. It was a story about love as infrastructure, hope as energy, and the quiet truth that sometimes the greatest power isn't what you build, but what you restore. The lights stretched across the water like constellations reborn, and beneath their glow, A man, a woman, and a child stood together, proof that even in the darkest storms, someone will always be there to fix what matters. Snow fell soft and steady over Halifax, blanketing the city in a hush that made every streetlight glow like a lantern in fog. The harbor lay half frozen, the water beneath still whispering against the docks, and in a small apartment overlooking the skyline, the warmth of life pulsed against the cold. Inside, laughter spilled from the kitchen like music. Zoe, now a little taller, stood on a stool stringing popcorn garlands for the Christmas tree that leaned slightly in the corner. "It's not crooked, Daddy," she declared. "It's creative." Noah, kneeling beside the tree, tilted his head. "Creative's another word for leaning dangerously left." From the stove, Clara called out, "Leave it. It's got character, like someone else I know." He shot her a look over his shoulder, mock offense melting into a grin. "I'm assuming that's a compliment." "Maybe," she said, stirring the sauce. The smell of rosemary and roasted vegetables filled the air, mixing with pine needles and cocoa. It had been 6 months since the launch of the Harbor Light Initiative, and in that short time, everything had changed. And yet, the things that mattered most hadn't. The program had expanded across Nova Scotia. New apprenticeships opened in small towns that had once felt forgotten. Clara still led the company, though now her title seemed less important than her mission. Noah had taken a new role as project mentor, guiding teams of technicians who were building smaller energy hubs modeled after Dartmouth Center. And Zoe, well, she'd declared herself the official chief junior engineer, complete with a badge she'd drawn in marker and taped to her coat. Tonight, though, none of that mattered. Tonight was about home. The table was full. The smell of baked bread mixed with wood smoke as neighbors filled the apartment. Mrs. Donnelly from next door, her husband Patrick, and a handful of volunteers from the foundation. Someone had brought a guitar, someone else, homemade cider. The evening unfolded like a patchwork quilt. Stories layered over laughter, the sound of spoons clinking against mugs, the faint whistle of wind at the window. Zoe, sitting between Clara and Patrick, handed out hand-drawn name cards for everyone. "To make it official," she said proudly. Mrs. Donnelly smiled. "You're a born leader, sweetheart." Zoe shrugged. "Maybe, but Daddy says good leaders still wash dishes." That got a round of laughter. Noah winked. "She's learning too fast." For a while, Clara sat back and just watched them. The people, the warmth, the light. It reminded her of the first time she'd seen Noah fix a circuit, his face lit by nothing but a flashlight and conviction. It reminded her of the nights they'd stayed late at the center, piecing together dreams that now powered homes across the bay. And it reminded her, most of all, how far they'd come from the night the world had gone dark. Later, when the plates were cleared and the cider poured, Clara reached for a small envelope resting on the windowsill. The handwriting was uneven, the paper creased. "What's that?" Noah asked. "A letter," she said softly. "From one of the first trainees in the program, Carlos from Lunenburg." She unfolded it and began to read aloud. "Dear Miss Reed, I wanted to thank you and Mr. Grant. Before the foundation, I was a dock worker with no steady job. I thought my hands were meant only for lifting, not building. Now, I help install the wind panels outside of town. Last night, I took my daughter there to show her what I helped create. She said, 'Daddy, you gave me light.' I realized she was right. You did too. Thank you for seeing people like me, for believing we could still shine." When Clara finished, silence fell. Even the fire seemed to pause for a breath. Noah reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing against her ring, the copper band that still caught the glow from the hearth. Zoe looked up. "He said the same thing you always say, Dad. Fix what matters." He smiled. "Smart guy?" Clara's eyes softened. "No, just someone who was waiting for someone to believe in him, like all of us." Outside, snow thickened. The harbor lights twinkled through the flakes like stars caught in motion. Noah stepped to the window, mug in hand, and gazed at the skyline. Across the water, the turbines of the Harbor Light Center turned slowly, their circular beams reflecting off the ice, in rhythmic pulses. From this distance, it looked like the city itself was breathing. Clara joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders and her own. Zoe pressed in between them, her small hands clutching theirs. "Look," Zoe whispered. "It's like the sky fell into the water." Noah nodded. "That's Halifax, kiddo. Always finding light where it shouldn't exist." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night? The elevator?" "Every day," he said softly. "Not because of what happened, but because of what came after." They stood there in silence, watching the snow drift past the window, the world beyond glowing in hues of white and gold. The city wasn't perfect, the work wasn't finished, but in that moment, surrounded by laughter, letters, and love, it was enough. Hours later, after the guests had left and the dishes were drying by the sink, the three of them returned to the window one last time. The harbor stretched before them, a quilt of lights stitched across the dark water. Zoe yawned, curling up on the couch between them. "I like our kind of light," she murmured sleepily. "It feels alive." Clara smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "It is alive, honey. It's made from people." Noah looked out at the turbines, spinning steadily against the horizon. "People like us." The room fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels full rather than empty. The fireplace crackled. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness. Clara whispered, "Love, work, and light." Noah squeezed her hand. "All the same thing, really." And as the glow of the city mingled with the golden flicker from their home, the three of them stood together, father, mother, daughter, watching Halifax gleam like a constellation reborn. The world, imperfect as it was, had found its rhythm again. And for those who chose to fix what mattered, the light would never go out.